Well, I'm glad you have joined us again. It is great to be back here, right here on this stool in the world headquarters of North Point Christian Church. And so there is a huge welcome from me to our entire online community of North Point Christian Church. Whether you live close or whether you live far away, we really hope that you feel like this is home for you during these strange days, and maybe even beyond. So we'll cross those bridges when we get there. But for today, I'm really glad you're here. One of the things that I suppose I've begun to realize the longer we keep doing this is that there is a group who meets here online. And it's a mixture of people, some who know each other really well because you have been part of North Point over the years and are now choosing to worship with us online. And I know that you guys miss meeting in person. Miss seeing your friends, miss the camaraderie and the joy of gathering together to worship and study and all of that. I know you miss that. But there's also a bunch of other people who probably know little or nothing about North Point. Maybe you have, just plain old wandered onto this site and decided this is something that can meet your needs, and so you're here. There are a lot of people who are here because you are old friends with people who still are part of the North Point family, or even you are friends of Wanda and I from other places that we have lived, either in our home area of San Diego or up in Huntington Beach and surrounding areas, and you've kind of reconnected maybe because of us on some level. But I was thinking about it this week, and there's a whole bunch of you that are watching this who really don't know anything at all about North Point, or really even each other for that matter. And I thought, how crazy is that this is what we do nowadays? And so one of the things that I've decided that I want to do here over the next who knows how many weeks, I want to take a few minutes each time we gather together here and try to give you a little bit of a glimpse of who North Point is. If you are from here, then your job here over the next couple of minutes is to do some fact checking. Make sure that what I'm saying is accurate. If it's not, then you write me, or you can comment on YouTube or on Facebook, and we'll get things right. But I'll do my best here. But this is really for you who don't know much about North Point. We are located in Lewisville, Texas. That is Lewis, not the Louisville of Kentucky. We are Lewisville. And Lewisville sits in the kind of the northern section, northern part of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And if you could look at a map, and you'd kind of see there's a triangle with Dallas down here and Fort Worth over here, and it goes up here, and it's kind of where Denton, Texas is, where the University of North Texas is, and we're a little closer up there near Denton compared to down near Dallas, but we're in what's called the Metroplex. Our church facilities are in the oldest section of Lewisville. We refer to it, or people who live here refer to where we are right in this building as Old Town Lewisville. And so if you talk to any of the locals around here and you just say, hey, we're in Old Town, they know exactly where it is. Or if we say, oh, we're right across the street from Porter Tire, they go, oh, I know right where that is. Or we're kind of catty corner to the new City Hall. Oh, I know right where that is. That's the way it is for people who happen to live here. And I got to tell you, we love this location. We love being in this spot. And in the weeks to come, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what's going on kind of in our area. But this is where we are. The Metroplex is really pretty huge. A few million people live here. This is no small area at all. Louisville actually has about 100,000 people, maybe more now these days. But honestly, for Wanda and I, it really still feels like a small town. I know that people who have grown up here laugh at us when we say that, but where we came from, this really does feel like a small town. And even though it is not small in number, there is a small feel to it where people know each other. And it is a really, really super friendly place. And North Point fits in right at home here. Now I'm going to show you a couple of pictures, 3 or 4 pictures maybe, of our building. Now, I think it's kind of funny that we would show pictures of our building. I know that you can go on church websites and you can get like a virtual tour of that church and all of their facilities and their grounds and their acreage and their campus and whatever. It doesn't take very long to get a tour, virtual or otherwise, of our building. This first picture that you see is a picture of what we call our main building. And in the main building, that is where our auditorium is, where we worship together. And off to one side is where our offices are. And we are at the corner of Mill Street and College Street in Old Town. It's our main building. And then the next picture that you'll see is our second building. So we can officially call ourselves a campus because we have 2 buildings here. And the other building, we've called it for years and years and years the Lighthouse. I'm not sure anybody here anymore knows how it got that name, but that's how it, how we refer to it. And that building sits behind our main building on Mill Street, and it is the old Catfish restaurant in Old Town. McGee's Catfish, and it was here and operating in our early years. When we got here, it closed down. It sat vacant for a while. We had some people in our church family that began praying about it. They would even walk over there and walk around it and pray for it because they believed that was kind of necessary for us to be able to expand our ministry here. And lo and behold, a number of years ago, we bought it, and we have slowly over time, as money has been available, we have refurbished it inside and out, and that building houses our children's ministry and our youth ministry and kind of various other kind of outreach things that we do. And we are really, really glad that we have that building. There's also a couple of other pictures you'll see here. One is of where our city hall is, and it really is just kind of catty corner to our building here, and a couple of pictures up and down the street, and we definitely want you to see our picture of Porter Tire. They're our friends. We share a parking lot here together, and anyway, this is where we're located, and I hope that in seeing that, you who have never been here, who have never come to Louisville, never been in person to North Point, I hope you get a little bit of a feel for who we are. And in the weeks to come, we'll show you more of where we're located and maybe a little more about who we are and pictures of people and some of the things that we do. And because we realize in this really quirky way, we are all one family. Whether we are online North Point or whether we are in person North Point. And hopefully in doing some of this, we'll learn to be better friends. And who knows, one of these days maybe we'll find out a little more about where you guys all live. I think that'd be really cool to find some of those things out. And it may take a little work, and it may take Some of you willing to send us a videotape and let us ask you a few questions and tell us about where you're from also. But make no mistake, we are just really glad you're here, and hope you keep coming and joining us. If you've been here any time at all, you know that part of our online experience, along with live also, but certainly online, is that we share in the Lord's Supper together. So I want to encourage you to take just a second, if you haven't already done this, and go into your kitchen and grab some juice and grab a piece of bread and bring it back and have it near you, so that when we get to that spot in our service, we can virtually share in the Lord's Supper together with each other. So for right now, let's spend some time in prayer, as we do each week when we gather here online. You know, it's really amazing how quickly we can detach ourselves from the events that rock our world. Certainly some of those events are more difficult than others to move on from. But that thing about time healing wounds really does have some truth to it. As we move farther and farther away from the event that brought pain or upset or disturbance, and we can work our way back to some kinds of feelings of normal. But the thing that really is amazing to me is sometimes how quickly we can do that. Maybe it's part of our emotional defense system, or just the ability that many of us have to compartmentalize the events of our life, and that allows us to move on. Or maybe, and I hate saying this, maybe sometimes we just don't really care all that much. I know that sounds horrible, but I think that maybe that has something to do with it sometimes. The effects of a hurricane or a tornado that is 500 or 1,000 miles away can really affect us in the moment. And it can be really deep and really profound, especially if we know something about that area. But unless we are personally connected, it's like we can still go out to dinner that night. Yeah, maybe we talk about it and maybe we don't. But if we are not, if we don't have that personal connection to it, sometimes it's really difficult to keep up the emotional investment in the tragedy of somebody else's life. A tsunami on the other side of the world, past the initial newsreel, sometimes it's not any more than a blip on our radar. Now, I don't like saying that, and that's embarrassing when those things have happened to me, and where it's like I have to be shocked back into the reality that there is something traumatic that is taking place in the lives of a bunch of people that I know nothing about, but I still want to feel it. I don't want to just move on to it. Now, I promise you, the purpose of this today is not to inflict guilt or to try to create some false sense of compassion in your heart for the things that are going on in our world. I just want us to think. I want you to stop what you're doing and think deeply about this. You see, the events that led up to the catastrophic crucifixion of Jesus on the cross 2,000 years ago, those events that were leading up to that moment were really, really dramatic according to the Bible. We read about it in all four, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, different parts of it, but the part I want to reflect on is out of the Gospel of John in chapter 13. Now, we're not going to read this right now. I'm just going to retell it kind of quickly, what you can read in detail in chapter 13. Chapter 13 kind of opens up at the Passover feast in that room where Jesus is with his disciples that ultimately is going to kind of end up with them sharing the Lord's Supper together. It's the night before Jesus goes to the cross and is crucified. And somewhere in that evening, we don't know exactly the sequence of events, but somewhere in that evening, Jesus went and got a basin of water and a towel, a couple of towels probably, a cloth and towels, and he disrobed and then wrapped around his waist a towel, and he began to go one by one around the table, washing his disciples' feet. It was a very strange thing. I would imagine that at least for part of that time, it would have felt just as awkward to them as it would to us if the host of a meal just started washing feet. It wouldn't be unusual to wash feet in those days. They were dirty and dusty from wearing sandals and walking on dirt, but this really wasn't about washing the dirt off their feet. It was really teaching the disciples a lesson that he was going to have to explain in total as the hours and days of remaining of his life and even beyond would transpire. He was teaching them that in this humble act of washing each other's feet, they were to take that as a symbolic reminder and even a model of how they were to spend their lives serving and loving other people. They would follow his lead. Now, when he was crucified to the cross, they would have really begun to understand what it meant to humbly serve. At this point in the meal, I think they are caught off guard a little bit and are trying to put pieces of this together. And then in the midst of this, he says that one of the 12, one of this close, intimate band of brothers was going to betray him. He didn't go into a lot of detail, but he was going to be betrayed. And even in that moment, he identified that it was going to be Judas Iscariot who was going to betray him later that evening. Can't even begin to imagine what must have gone on in Judas's heart and mind in that moment where he was called out for something that he had been thinking of doing but hadn't done yet, and at least not completed it, and to be called out by name. It hadn't happened yet, but he had already set it in motion, and it says that Judas just left, broken, not just embarrassed, broken. He knew that he had betrayed Jesus. Then Jesus says later that the Son of Man is going to be glorified, and what that meant is that Jesus was going to die, and they still didn't understand. It was still confusing to them. And then he says to them, I think they were starting to get riled up a little bit and said, "Well, we'll go fight for you. Nobody's going to kill you." And Jesus says to them, "Well, you can't follow me where I am going. You can't do what I'm going to do. You can't go to the cross where I'm going. It's not going to happen." And then he says to them instead, "There is a new command I want to give you. I'm commanding you to love each other in a bold and identifiable way so that everybody that sees you will see that this love is something spectacular and supernatural, and that is transformational even. And that when people see that you love each other and that you love your enemies and that you love all of those who you come in contact with, they will know that you know me and that you and I are one." Wow. And Peter, who had this habit, I would say, of sometimes speaking before he thought it all the way through, he just sort of blurts out in this moment, "Jesus, I will follow you. I will lay my life down for you." And Jesus then goes, hold on there, buddy. You're going to deny me. You're going to say you never even knew me. Oh, I don't think Peter had any clue what was going to transpire in his life over the next 24 and 48 hours, and even longer than that. Peter knew that they had this, their heart. They led with their hearts, but they often didn't think things all the way through, and Peter was definitely guilty of that. And then at the beginning of chapter 14, Jesus says, kind of goes through it and says, you need to stop worrying. You need to trust me. You need to believe that I know what's going on and I know what is best. I'm going to die. Oh, how shocking that had to be for them to hear it in such a blunt way. I'm going to die, but I'm going to come back. And when I come back, I'm going to take you to my Father's house. You can bet your life on that. And then Thomas says, "Lord, we don't even know where you're going. How can we know the way there?" And it's Jesus' answer to that question that has thrilled hearts and plagued consciences and messed up thinking for 2,000 years as we wrestle with what it is that he meant when he said these words. In John chapter 14, verses 6 and 7, this is what it says. Jesus answered Thomas, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him, and you have seen him. I grew up believing the most important question that anybody could ask another person was, do you want to go to heaven when you die? I received, as a lot of people did of my era, some training in this methodology of talking with people about Jesus. And we were to ask a question that sounded much like, if you were to die tonight, if you were to die tonight, and you were to stand before God in heaven, and he were to ask you, why should I let you in? What would you say? What would you say in that moment? And so we had this picture that was just drilled into our heads. My growing up in my church, and as I got into young adulthood, it was just again and again and again this picture. Back then, though, I got to tell you, it never once occurred to me to ask, at least to ask another person. I didn't even ask myself, but it never occurred to me to ask another person, do you want the kind of life that Jesus has to give to you? Do you want what Jesus has to offer to you right now? Never. I never even thought of that. Nobody ever told me to ask that question. It was simply a question about heaven or hell and what happens after we die. That is what we were driven by. And really, even more important than just that question, it was all about making sure that I believed the right stuff so I didn't go to hell. That it was connected that intimately. And growing up, I learned to think a lot about hell. I had vivid pictures of it that were kind of placed in my memory banks. Some of them came out of old picture Bibles, and some of them came out of events or movies that I saw, or certainly these picturesque sermons that preachers in my home church would preach, sometimes in gory detail of what it would be like after people died who didn't know Jesus. I saw them. They were in my memory bank. And out of that came for me an awful lot of fear. In my young adult days, honestly, it's what fueled my early youth ministry approach. There was a lot of, I'm embarrassed to say this, there was a lot of fear that we promoted at camps and in Bible studies and sermons and concerts and what have you. A lot of fear. A question I ultimately asked myself, though, was this. And I can't tell you when I actually asked it. It maybe came in time. But the question is very clear to me, what I ended up asking. And that is, do I really need to focus my attention, like the major part of my attention, on a place of literal, eternal torment for those who don't have a faith in God or believe in Jesus? And does that have to be front and center in my life in order for me to be motivated to open my mouth and talk to them about matters of faith? Is that my motivational force behind me? Because that's what I was told, and that was what I lived for the better part of my life into my mid-20s. That is what needed to happen. So here's a confession. Some of you have heard me say this in different ways before, but my confession is this. For years and years and years of my life, I struggled with talking to people about my faith. Now, it was one thing to stand up in front of a group of teenagers and talk about the Bible, or to even stand up in front of a church body and preach, because pretty much all of those were friendly people, and most all of them already believed, at least in part, what I believed. So it was a safe audience. Now, I'm talking about why it was that I struggled with talking to people that I was a casual acquaintance with, or a neighbor, or somebody who didn't have faith, or somebody like that. It was, at times for me, it was paralyzing to think about having those conversations. I was afraid I wouldn't have the right answers, and I was even more afraid of looking stupid or being made fun of, which was, I look back on that and it is so ridiculous to think of feeling that way, and yet I know I did, and I have had countless conversations with people throughout the years of my life who share the same kind of feelings about that. But here's what finally made sense to me. When all you're concerned about is whether or not people go to hell when they die, frankly, there's really not a lot of urgency in that. Maybe a little short-term urgency, but nothing real long-term. In reality, unless we really, really know the person and have deep emotional attachment to them, we really don't sense the urgency any more than we sense the urgency of a tsunami that hits on the other side of the globe. It's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. If it's about what happens after a person dies, honestly, we always think there's going to be more time. If you ever have that sense of, oh, I really need to say something right now, I'm telling you, the loud voice on the other shoulder is going to tell you, you can do that tomorrow. You can do that next week. You don't have to do it right now. Let's wait for a better time when you're going to get a better reception, or when there aren't so many people around, or when, and all those reasons. We don't have that sense of urgency because we really sense somewhere inside we've got more time to be able to do this. Do we really think about people over there? Do we really care about what's happening to others? These are deep questions that every person who claims to follow Jesus needs to answer. Do we pray for them, or do we just shrug at what's going on in their life and get out and mow the lawn? Because that is what is urgent. That's why this story in John 14 is about more than simply going to heaven after life is over. Do you think Jesus is the only way? Sometimes Christians ask that as kind of a test question to see if I give the right answer that they are looking for. Sometimes others ask it hoping to hear the opposite answer as the right answer, even. The question raises another question, actually. And that question is this: if Jesus is the only way, well, the only way to what? Do we ever stop to ask that question? According to these words of Jesus, in this passage, The goal is to be with the Father. And when you are with Jesus, you are experiencing the fullness of God Himself. That's the truth that is being taught in this passage. Actually, the book of Hebrews, which we have studied over the past couple of years, this passage says it in another way, I think even more clearly in Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. I'm going to read it. You can follow along. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways, but in these last days He has spoken to us by His Son. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of His being, sustaining all things by His powerful word. Hebrews 1, 1 to 3. Listen, is the goal simply to get to heaven, or for people to actually meet Jesus? To have Him wash their feet, to know Him, to trust Him, to follow His words and His example. Here is a reminder today as we kind of wrap this up. Is being a Christian more about the afterlife or more about this life? Is the goal to know the right things or to know the right person? If you want someone to taste the life they are missing right now, if you want them to experience life the way it was designed from the beginning, to experience some of the life that you possess being a follower of Jesus, if you want someone to experience power and fruit and the life-changing presence of Jesus, if you want the people you love to have meaning and purpose and hope, you will have urgency, but only if you're experiencing that life yourself. That's why we come back to Jesus every time. I want you to make sure you have your communion with you right now. And I want you to hear these words. Is a life of faith more than fire insurance for you? Think about that. Is a life of faith more than fire insurance for you? Are you actually following Jesus the way? Do you live daily in truth, revealed perfectly in the words of Jesus and the example He lived out? Even more, are you personally experiencing life, like real life, the fullness of life that can only come from walking daily with the one who gave His life so that you could have yours? Well, you can. I guess that's why we keep showing up here every week. And as we share the Lord's Supper right now with the bread and the juice, the bread of His body and the juice of His blood, according to Scripture, I simply want you to remember that in the act of His dying, the act of physically laying down His life for the good of others, we who come to Him by faith can grab hold of this life we were always destined to have. And that is simply amazing. Let's share in the Lord's Supper together.
I have a maker. He formed my heart before even time began. My life was in His hands. He knows my my name. He knows my every thought. He sees each tear that falls and hears me when I call. I have a Father. He calls me his own. He'll never leave me, no matter where I go. He knows my name. He knows my every thought. He sees each tear that falls and hears me when I call. He knows my name. He knows my every thought. He sees each tear that falls and hears me when I call. And hears me when I call. And hears me when I call.
Here's my challenge to you. Don't live this week as people who have purchased some cut rate, inexpensive fire insurance. You know, the kind you hope you can cash in on when the catastrophe of life comes your way. Rather, how about we begin to live our lives as people who have been set free? You think? How about if we get about the business of doing that? People who've been rescued from death row and who've been handed this brand new life, full of potential, full of possibilities, and most of all, lives that can be filled with the fruit of the Spirit, the fruit of love and of joy and of peace, and even of faith and hope, these gifts that have been given to us by the one who rose from the dead. How about we get on with living our lives in that way? And I guarantee you, the more we live our lives in that way, the more we will be excited to tell others about that so that they can have the same life also. Until next time, see ya.
I sought the Lord, and He answered me, and delivered me from every fear. Those who look on Him are radiant. They'll never be ashamed. They'll never be ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard me and saved me from my enemy. The Son of God.